Good evening, listeners. Not to get existential here off the bat, but I'm sure many of you have wondered about your own existence, right? That's rhetorical, don't answer that. Have you ever thought about why we're here? I don't mean you specifically, I mean all of us. The collective. Everyone. And I don't mean that in some metaphorical or metaphysical sense, but rather, how did we get here? I mean this, quite literally. Take the Enclave, for example. What even is the Enclave? Why is it where it is? Why do we have to stay north of the mountains? We're so focused on ourselves and our day-to-day lives today. And for a lot of us, the number one thing is survival, especially those who live far away from the protection that the Spire offers in these northern lands, as harsh as they are. But I feel we often forget about those who got us here. History, my friends. Tonight, we'll embark on a journey through the annals of history to uncover what was once thought to be lost. Come and join me in the Spellbound Soirée. Welcome, my dear listeners, to the Spellbound Soirée, a radio show where I, Iasos Etonatas, usually bring you the news and happenings around the Spire. But today, I have something a bit different, and I hope to do this again at some point. As I said before, we will be delving into the history of this island, Rethir. If by chance you are confused by this name and believe this island to be named something other than Rethir, that is incorrect, I'm afraid. That name comes from the ones who invaded this island many centuries ago. They gave this island a new name. They kicked us out of our homes and labeled all who practice our ways of Aether, especially those who followed Magnus, Eldritch. This is why we are sometimes referred to as the Eldritch Enclave. Or, more aptly, the Enclave. But what exactly is an enclave? Many of you may be wondering. Well, that is rather simple, really. An enclave is essentially a group, or, I guess, sort of has the connotation that you should be wary of them, or that they may be dangerous in some way. The literal definition is as follows. A portion of territory within or surrounded by a larger territory whose inhabitants are culturally or ethnically distinct. When the Spire first reached out to the other institutions of etheric power, such as Iranasi, we found that we have been labeled as a reclusive people. And that may just be the nature of the region we live in to an extent, but it also comes from the bigotry of the invaders down south. They claimed that we shut ourselves away from the world, but here we are reaching out. Our regions, Rethir and Etharia, are names derived from goddesses, but Athat is a goddess of conquest, and I believe that name is actually a pseudonym or epithet for an entirely different goddess. Though they claim otherwise. Whereas Rian is a goddess of the land. She gives hope to the despondent. She embodies the island and its people. Before we get into this nearly forgotten tale, let's go over some things. Legend has it that Rian created us, the island's original inhabitants by taking the Erd crystals from around the island, shaping them, and breathing life into them. That is essentially how we came to be on this island. Eventually, our culture thrived here, sparking a huge island-spanning kingdom. But as you can see from our lives today, that is no longer the case. So, how then did we get to where we are today? Well, we'll get to that. But as I'm sure many of you are aware, we don't have a formal schooling or education system in this region, at least not since the sundering of our kingdom. That is largely left up to families to take care of, more or less. The one exception to that being, of course, the study of Aether, and to an extent, other cases such as history and mathematics. Stuff like that can be found in the Spire as well, but the Spire does particularly lean towards Aether. One may join the Spire and learn how they can utilize Aether if they have the talent, passing a sort of entrance exam. Obviously, more is offered at the Spire, as I just said, but the study of Aether is the primary purpose. I would not be here talking to you about history were that not the case. This etheric study is the route I myself took, and that led me to where I am today. But the state of education has left much to the question of our history to most of the people north of the Kalta Mountains. Even what I just explained about the creation of this island's original inhabitants, while that is a common story and is so often told to children, we don't really know where it comes from or if there's any validity to it. The same can be said for the rest of our history. A lot of spoken oral tradition about the sundering of the kingdom, but not a lot of documents or specific details. I found something, though. I have discovered something grand in scale. You see, I've been digging around in the Spire, and I discovered something about our history. Well, the history of the Spire, I mean in this context, not the history of this country. I found what I can only describe as the archives. If that makes any sense, really. A library, I suppose, of sorts. But there's more to it than just old tomes and grimoires. I mean, yes, obviously that is physically what it makes up for the most part. But important to what we're going to discuss today, I found walls and walls of scrolls with the history of our people. I asked around once I had found these, before I had, really started to delve into it, and apparently the archives disappeared a while back, some 20-ish years ago. But now they seem to have returned, even if only for me. I've never been able to bring someone else here. They can't find the door. It's very strange. Curious, you might say. Anyway, the nature of the Spire can be so fickle, it seems. Yeah. But I've decided it is my duty to recount the tale of this isle for you. Perhaps this is the Lady Rian at work. This may take some time as I continue my research, but for now let's attempt to answer the question of how the Enclave came to be. Or more, why it came to be, I suppose. In the early ages, the world was in turmoil. Only a few millennia prior, the gods waged war in the planar regions, and the world was still churning from this. The sort of aftershocks of this great conflict rang around the Nahar. This word is ancient Rutherian, so many of you may not know it. The word roughly translates into common as serpent, and in this context is referring to our planet. It was at this time that the people of the island Rithir were in the early stages of forming a more sedentary lifestyles. Various clans grew from this, and in time the seeds of the kingdom would begin to sprout, more scattered and broken, but at one time will be united. Once that kingdom had sprouted, Magnus, the patron of the Enclave and our Spire, was counsel and wizard to the king of the island, Ravana. This king had only recently taken to the throne. Prior to this, he wasn't even a clan leader. He was just a vagabond, a wanderer. Now, though, he was a hero. From what I read, there was no other choice for the crown. He alone was able to unite all the people of the island, all the clans under his banner, and did so not through war or violence, but rather through kindness and goodwill. And mind you, this was at a time of war on the island. These clans were by no means allies to each other. You see, Ravana was a hero to these clans. No, the people, more than the clans. They hailed him Ardri, meaning High King, signifying his role as the uniter and champion of Rithir. To be clear, the clans rarely fought one another, so when I say this was a time of war, I mostly mean tensions were high, and many of them were not on good terms. On the verge of war, I suppose would be a better way to phrase it, but I digress. At this point, they were on very uneasy ground, and all signs pointed to conflict. Ravana came along and eased everyone's suffering. He provided for them. Where they lacked, he provided. Some of them lacked water. He found streams and redirected them. Some of them lacked provisions, food. He sowed the seeds, showed them how to plant, how to grow, how to forage, how to hunt. He cooled the hot-headed kings or leaders of clans and got them to see sense. He fixed their key issues and alleviated all the tensions. A few decades slipped by, and with the clans now united, Ravana turned his attention to a new task, forging a kingdom. This would become the realm we now know as Rithir, named in honor of our mother goddess. Magnus was there as well, having set aside his own crown to serve as Ravana's most trusted advisor. Together, the two dreamed of a land where all would be welcome, a true sanctuary for the lost and the wandering, free from strife. Yet, even the purest hopes are vulnerable. Trouble descended without warning. One morning, a courier burst into the throne room, nearly tearing the doors from their hinges. He collapsed at the king's feet, chest heaving, sweat streaking his brow. Ravana leaped from his throne, face tight with worry and fear. The messenger clung desperately to the king's arm, voice trembling as he shared his astonishing news he had carried against all odds. The courier revealed that a group of newcomers had landed upon our shores. To Ravana, this was a cause for celebration. He relished every opportunity to welcome new souls. Yet the messenger insisted there was more. These were not destitute refugees, but hardened warriors. Ravana remained undeterred, eager to extend his hospitality. But an odd detail emerged from the ancient records. The newcomers had shipwrecked, and each bore the mark of a winged scorpion, a symbol I have found nowhere else. The text grows fragmented here, but it's clear that Ravana, upon learning of their plight, set out with Magnus to greet them. At first, the strangers were wary, even bristling with suspicion. Only after Magnus intervened did the tensions ease, allowing for a genuine conversation. Ravana then learned their story. The newcomers were warriors from Nibiria, on a sacred mission. They called themselves paladins, followers of a goddess named Lysir. As their vessel neared our island, a violent storm arose. Amid the chaos, they glimpsed a light and heard a voice, a That, whom they believed had guided them to safe haven. Having regaled Ravana with their tale, the paladins offered their names. All of their names seemed to have been lost to time, save for one: Ramu. After their introductions, they begged the king and Magnus for any aid they could provide. Magnus, apparently sensing something, attempted to dissuade Ravana from offering aid, but Ravana, seeing a mutually beneficial opportunity, asked them if they would be willing to train the militia and the guard force of the kingdom. In return, he offered them religious freedom and various places around the island to set up temples, shrines, or whatever they needed to appease their goddess. The group of paladins fervently accepted this offer. So they went back to the castle to formalize and create what would become the Guardians of Rithir. Once an untrained militia force, now a full-blown army. There's a note in the margins that I can't quite make out myself. All I can get is the words Guardians, Paladins, and all. I'm not quite sure what this note is implying, but it does appear to be hastily written and then crudely scribbled out. It's difficult to tell when it was written compared to the rest of the text. To me, this kind of suggests that it would probably have been written around the same time. Anyway, I digress. The Nibirian group has shown up on the island and quickly established itself within our kingdom. Initially, their presence was welcomed. Patrols grew in the countryside, and the wilderness was a bit more tamed. You could walk at night without fear. More and more of the outlying clans pledged their loyalty to the kingdom. The paladins helped bring order to this land, where chaos reigned. All seemed well in the kingdom, and steadily the power of the king grew, with a festering tumor in his side named Ramu. Over time, the paladins' power grew, and consequently, Ramu's power would grow as well, until one day, all of the kingdom's armed forces were under the purview of the Guardians. I'm sure you can tell the kingdom was headed for ruin. In the years after their arrival, the Guardians, as they would come to be called, enjoyed a rather lavish lifestyle. They would be whisked around the kingdom, building their monasteries dedicated to the goddess named Lysir. Whenever they would arrive in a new town, they would be greeted and welcomed with extravagant feasts. They would drink and be merry all through the night. The other thing that seemed to have been noted on is that they would set up 2 new institutions in Rithir: brothels and fighting arenas. Not much is written about the brothels. Perhaps they simply wished for company on their travels throughout the kingdom. Or perhaps this has something to do with their foreign god. These arenas, though, have been written about quite often. They were constructed in the ground. They referred to them as pits. They claimed they were modeled after the ones in their homeland. When they were questioned about these things, they would claim it's part of their religion, and it's what Lysir had bid them to do. What kind of a goddess bids for her cult, those devout to her, to shed blood in her name? However, the new institutions proved to be rather popular, mostly with the Guardians and those who joined their ranks. There isn't much of note about what these Guardians worship specifically. The name Lysir isn't really expanded upon in the documents I've found thus far. What information there is, though, is as follows. The Guardians are said to have been the type to revel in their frenzy. They would argue, they would fight, and they would bleed. These are said to be core to their beliefs. To fuel their frenzy, they would engage in hedonistic acts, in line with the brothels and the arenas they constructed. The more they revel in their frenzy, the closer they can be to their goddess, perhaps. I'm not entirely sure. The fragments I've found thus far are frustratingly bare on information about Lysair. No hymns are preserved, no myths of note of either mercy or creation. Only notes on her followers, bloodthirsty barbarians, raiders, high society folk with secrets to hide. The only mention of her name outside of the Guardians was in an ancient text I've found on the War of the Gods. Her role in this, or if she was created from it, is unknown to me. It makes me wonder, though. Does Lysair demand this frenzy of her cult? Or did her cult discover justification for their actions once sanctified? These gladiatorial arenas seem to have been almost like a second temple to them. They would throw thugs and people who were caught doing any crime, be it murder, theft, or even slander, into the pits, and make them fight one another and the Guardians themselves. Ravana, hearing about this, attempted to put a stop to it, but there wasn't much he could do. The Guardians had taken hold of the entire militant force of the island. The only people Ravana could rely on were Magnus and his mages. It is said Ravana sought the guidance of Magnus, who told him that he would attempt to establish his mages as healers within the arenas, under the guise of making the fights last longer. This seems to have been a compelling enough argument to the Guardians, so the mages were instituted. A note on Magnus here. Obviously, within the remnants of the Ritherian kingdom, or the Enclave, as we're often called, we see Magnus as a mortal, risen god. Our patron who guided us to these northern lands of solitude and safety, away from the slaughter down south. Even though these texts come from a time before his apotheosis, he seems to have been seen as more than an etheric aid to Ravana. His mages in some regions were seen as the true protectors of the kingdom. They would help quell fights and restore peace, where the Guardians would fan the flames. In these regions, especially at crossroads, many would leave offerings to Magnus. The text is not clear whether this was done out of pure reverence for his actions in preserving peace, or if it was done because he had he had become a mythic being to the common folk. Though, the troubles would not end there. Some time passed, and Ramu, the leader of the Guardians, grew wise to what was actually going on with the mages in the pits. You see, Ramu in particular reveled in the bloodbath and death that surrounded these fights. He would argue that he was just doing so because of the criminal nature, or his own religious beliefs, or the religious beliefs of the combatants. Ravana would not see it that way, of course. So the two of them had a falling out, and Ramu began to gather political sway with his followers, and a few others who had been indoctrinated into his religion. Eventually, Ramu and other Guardians would go around and arrest and throw mages into the various pits that dotted the kingdom, starting with those who previously worked as healers in the pits. Of course, these arrests were not legitimate and would catch the ire of Magnus in particular. I don't think this document specifically encompasses the sheer magnitude of who Magnus was in life. For instance, another text I found from a similar time period claims Magnus, at this point, was referred to as the living god, and some seers would refer to him by the name Iacovorius. The text suggests some great importance to this, or some gravitas, if you will, but I couldn't find this name or any meaning for it anywhere else, at least not yet. But I digress. Magnus hearing of his mage's plight, would take to the arena. In a blinding flash of light, he would crash down into the pit, shaking the very ground around them and interrupting a fight. Or, rather, an execution. One between a guardian and a young mage. I imagine dust and debris would be flying about, and once this settled, a voice full of power and vitriol would call out, "Bring me Ramu." Magnus stood there, staff in hand. "Or I shall take every guardian's head." A sound bellowed out from the stands. "Very good. A great display of power, Magnus." Ramu had stood up and began approaching the arena. "You think you can just waltz in here, staff in hand, and just have it your way, huh?" Ramu called out as he descended into the arena. Magnus's eyes flared with rage. "Oh, such a great look in those eyes. What is it they call you now? Omnipotent? No. Almighty." Ramu met Magnus's gaze. "Well, I'd like to put that title to the test. Shall we?" "Ramu, you put my mages to the slaughter, all for your sick and twisted goddess. Well, no more. Either you let them go, or I will put an end to you." Magnus then pulled his staff up, as though he was preparing to cast something rather wicked. "What's this? I thought we were promised religious freedom here." "I made you no such promise." Magnus then launched himself at Ramu. As he did, Ramu was barely able to dodge the lunge Magnus made with his staff. When he looked back up, he saw that where his head had been, the wall behind it had a rather large hole in it, with Magnus's staff at the center. Fear, for the first time, washed over Ramu's face. All he could do was sit there on the ground and cower. Taking the opportunity, Magnus took to the air, debating whether he should bring the whole arena down, or if he should just take Ramu's life. In the air, he began concentrating his power into a dense ball, gathering energy from everything around him. Typically, mages need a staff or wand or some sort of focus to cast powerful spells such as this, but Magnus was different. He was loved by the Aether. A voice from the top of the pit called out to Magnus. "Stop, please, my friend. There is no need to end more lives." Ravana had appeared, and he was pleading with Magnus to set his anger aside. Magnus turned to look at Ravana, chest heaving from having run all the way here. Magnus's eyes closed for a second, and he heaved a sigh. "I understand, my king." Magnus relented. The spell he had been gathering energy for had dissipated. "But I shall still punish him for his transgressions." Magnus then stuck out his hand with an open palm and aimed it at Ramu. "No, Magnus, don't!" Ravana shouted too late. A blast of black-green, fiery energy crackled in Magnus's grasp, building power. A beam shot out from each one of Magnus's fingers, culminating in one bigger beam directed at Ramu, who was still cowering on the ground. The beam made contact with his flesh, and Ramu began to cry out in pain. He began writhing on the ground of the arena. Magnus, seemingly satisfied, gathered up his mages and removed them from the premises. All the while, Ramu continued to lie there in agony, though as Ravana had wished, he would not die. Magnus is said to have assured Ravana that if something were to happen to his mages again, he would not fail to take Ramu's head, and all the guardians along with him. And from this incident going forward, the guardians who supported them would know Magnus as the Eldritch Magister, showing their fear of him and Aether users in general. This incident sparked the beginning of the end. Ramu and his cronies rose up and led an assault on the capital, taking the crown for themselves. Those still loyal to the old crown did not flee blindly. they were led. When the southern roads closed and the winged scorpion flew where the royal sigil once stood, Magnus appeared at the head of the people, not as Ravana's advisor, nor even as a simple mage, but as something newly revealed. The texts describe him wreathed in light, his staff blazing as a beacon through the mountain passes thought impassable. It is said that avalanches stilled at his command, that storms parted, and that no child was lost along the journey. He led them into the high sanctuary that would become known as the Spire, called by some the Enclave, where stone, magic, and will were bound together into refuge. There, at last, the people were safe. After this, Magnus was never seen again. The faithful say he did not vanish, he ascended, that having fulfilled his final duty to the mortals, he shed what remained of flesh and took his rightful place among the divine. That he is now the Watcher of the North, guardian of the Spire, and the silent judge of those who wield Aether. Even the most pragmatic accounts do not dispute this. They merely note that no mage since has wielded power as he did, nor bent the world so willingly to their command. Because of this, the Guardians changed. They ceased their open persecution of mages, though there are still stories, not out of mercy, but out of fear. For though Magnus no longer walks the world, his hand is believed to ever be near, ready to strike should the balance tip too far. The pits, however, did not close. If anything, they expanded. The southern provinces grew quiet, then sealed. Governance there is spoken of only in religious terms, overseen by wardens and high priests of Lycir. Foreign accounts, rare and dangerous to keep, speak of vast arenas beyond the sea, where prisoners fight beneath scorpion banners, and where faith is proven through suffering. Some of these accounts speak of a king without a name, a man who refused to break. I cannot confirm these tales, but they always name the same overseer of the pits, elevated above all others within Lysir's faith, Ramu. As for Ravana, no grave is named, no death recorded. Among my people, this absence is not seen as hope, but as warning. Kings may fall, gods may rise, but some sacrifices are too terrible to sanctify. Ruthir endures still, hidden in the mountains, small and vigilant. We remember Ravana as our last king. We worship Magnus as our patron god. And we record these histories not to glorify the past, but to ensure that when Lysir's faithful come north, they will find us prepared. May the Watcher yet see us. Hello. Hi. I'm the creator of the Spellbound Soirée, and I just wanted to thank you for listening to this episode. I didn't script anything for this, so I almost never do. Kind of just want to do an outro off the cuff, if that makes sense. But yeah, I just wanted to thank you for listening. You can find this podcast on YouTube at The Annals of the Arcane, I believe. You can find a Tumblr with the same post. There's probably other social media connected there as well. Instagram at Feckin_undead, FECKIN_UND. But yeah, I wanted to thank you. This episode in particular has been a pain to get out, as anyone who's been following the podcast for a while will have known, because there's only 2 episodes out right now, and they were both, I believe, in 2024. It is now 2026. I've been working on this for the better part of 2 years, not because it was hard to write or anything like that, but because every time I went back to it, it felt like a bit of a struggle to just get anything down from time to time. And eventually I did get the majority of it down. And then I went back through and added a lot more to it to make it into a full episode. And then it got corrupted. And that really killed my momentum on this. But yeah. But I got it done now. And I hope to be more consistent. Don't know if that'll come anytime soon with the way my life's been going lately. But I digress. Again, thank you for watching, listening, whatever. You can find this podcast on a few different platforms. Spotify, iHeartRadio, I believe, it's on there. There's a few other places as well. And if you're interested in something a little more, to do with the real world and history and folklore and stuff like that, you can listen to Paranormal Express, my other radio show turned podcast. But yeah, thanks again, and hopefully I'll see you all very soon.